Grab your favorite beverage. It's time for the Beers and Bruisers Fantasy Football Podcast.
Geeks, what is up? This is part 2 of Week 15's episode of the Beers and Bruisers Fantasy Football Podcast. We got 9 NFC home games to get through, and we're going to start with the Rams at the Cowboys. I know Todd Gurley is not the same as he once was, which is such a shame. He was so much fun to watch those past 2 years, but he had 110-plus total yards on 27 touches, his most touches by far. It really seems like this offense has went back to the way they were, and they're running through Gurley again, so play Todd Gurley. Bobby Woods with his first touchdown of the season last week. Cooper Kupp also scored, and Brandon Cooks was unable to catch either of his 2 targets. He has completely fallen off. If he's on your team still, there's no reason to be rostering him. The guy we got to acknowledge is Tyler Higbee here. So 19 targets over the last 2 games, with no Gerald Everett, and Gerald Everett is out again this week. Over 100 yards on 7 catches in each game. Now, he was playing the 2 teams that rank number 1 and number 2 in fantasy points allowed to tight ends. So I don't know if this is Sean McVay taking advantage of good matchups, or if the offense has really changed to featuring this tight end as the third option in the passing game and gotten away from Brandon Cooks, like I said. It'll be telling to see how LA attacks the Cowboys defense in this game. I went back and I looked at Cowboys versus tight ends this year. So in week 1, they gave up 116 yards on 11 catches and a touchdown to Evan Ingram. Week 4, they held Jared Cook to 21 yards on 2 catches. Week 5, they held Jimmy Graham to 41 yards on 3 catches. In Week 6, Ryan Griffin with the Jets, he scored a touchdown. Week 7, Dallas Goedert scored and had 70 yards. In Week 10, Kyle Rudolph had 2 touchdowns. So they have been beaten up by a couple of good tight ends. They've allowed Ryan Griffin to score, who I don't know if I'd call him a good tight end, and Kyle Rudolph, they allowed him to score twice. So they've been good, they've been bad, up and down. That's why they're in the middle of the pack. It's not a good matchup. It's not a bad matchup, but like I said, we will see whether or not Sean McVay has just been exploiting the bad matchup or the good matchup, the bad defenses against tight ends over the past 2 weeks, or if Tyler Higbee really is the third option there now. It's going to be fun to watch. For the Cowboys, it has been now 5 games since Zeke's last 100-plus yard rush game, and I don't think we're going to see another one this week. The Rams' D has only allowed 3 running backs to hit the 100-yard mark this year. That's Mark Ingram, Chris Carson, and Christian McCaffrey. Nick Chubb just missed the mark with 96 yards in Week 11, but the Rams are also very good at defending running backs in the passing game, allowing the 7th fewest receptions and receiving yards to running backs. I hate to say it because I have Zeke in 2 of my leagues, but temper your expectations there. He's probably going to end up playing more like an RB2 than an RB1. Last week, Amari Cooper with the touchdown and 83 yards, while Michael Gallup had the 100-yard game. They both caught 6 passes. I think Cooper will see a lot of Jalen Ramsey unless the Cowboys move him around like they did on Thanksgiving to avoid Trey White. And I think they learned from that, and I think they're going to do it again. So I expect both Amari and Gallup to be pretty good. All right, moving to the Seahawks and the Panthers. Looking at the Seahawks first, I expect Chris Carson to just dominate in this game. The Panthers' run defense is atrocious with no Rashad Penny breathing over his neck. The Seahawks have not added another running back, so it's just Chris Carson, C.J. Prosise, and the rookie Travis Homer. And they're playing the Panthers, who allow on average 122 rushing yards per game. So it should be the Chris Carson show for sure. With the Seahawks most likely to run the ball down Carolina's throat, I expect Tyler Lockett to have a big game as well. Lockett benefits the most from the play action. All 3 of Lockett's 100-yard games and 4 of his 5 games that he scored all came when Seattle had over 100 yards rushing. So, yes, he's been disappointing since his huge game in Week 9, but this is a good week to fire up Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf as well. Looking at the Panthers, McCaffrey is McCaffrey. There's not really much to say about him. DJ Moore had 7 straight games with 9 or more targets, and 5 of those 7 with double-digit targets. Until last week, he had 4 catches on 6 targets for 81 yards, and not a coincidence that Ian Thomas, who was filling in for the injured Greg Olsen, had 10 targets, more than he had all year combined. So he played on 86% of the snaps, had his touchdown at the 1-yard line, so he got that red zone target that's so important for tight ends. And the Panther tight ends have a 24% target share this season, which is pretty good. And it seems like the Panthers know how to attack defenses that are good at defending tight ends. You look at all the teams that they heavily targeted their tight ends. Week 2 against Tampa Bay, 9 targets, 110 yards. Week 3 against Arizona, the best matchup for tight ends, 7 targets, 75 yards, and 2 touchdowns for Greg Olsen. Week 6 against Tampa Bay again, another 7 targets, 52 yards. Week 9, 6 targets against Tampa Bay. Week 10, 10 targets against Green Bay, 98 yards. And in Week 13, 7 targets for 46 yards. And then, like I said, last week we saw against Atlanta, Ian Thomas had 10 targets, 57 yards, and a touchdown. So all those teams that I just mentioned, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 teams, they all rank in the top 10 as far as fantasy points allowed to tight ends. So it seems like this offense knows how to attack good matchups. They know how to attack bad defenses. And the Seahawks defense, their glaring weakness is their defense of tight ends. So I really think Ian Thomas is a pretty solid play this week, especially considering that Greg Olsen is out again. It was confirmed yesterday. So if I was a Greg Olsen owner, I would drop his ass and I'd go pick up Ian Thomas right now. The Seahawks allow the second most fantasy points to tight ends. So I really think Ian Thomas is going to be pretty good this week. All right, the next game here, we got the Browns at the Cardinals, which this is the Cliff Kingsbury Bowl. David Njoku's got the matchup here. Obviously, like I just mentioned, Cardinals against tight ends, they're the worst. They saw 3 targets Njoku only saw 3 targets last week, coming back from that injury. But I'm sure Freddie Kitchens will call a few more design plays for Njoku. All Browns should be started in this game. The Cardinals' defense is putrid all around. I'm really excited to see this group of Landry, Odell, Njoku, Chubb, and Hunt all on the field at the same time. I'm excited to see what they're going to do against this really bad defense. And they're not even at 100%. Odell's dealing with this sports hernia. And like I said, Njoku's coming back from injury. I think he... a wrist injury, or maybe it was a concussion, I forget. But it's going to be fun to watch this offense as they grow together. Hopefully Odell sticks around so we can get another year of all 5 of these guys, because I really think they're going to do something special. Looking at the Cardinals, Drake only saw 3 of the 7 running back targets last week, only 5 catches in the last 2 games after having 6 catches in the 2 games before that, 6 catches each game in the 2 games before that. So I'm avoiding Drake and every other Cardinal besides Christian Kirk, to be honest. He should see another 9 to 12 targets in this game. I expect them to trail. I expect them to fall behind the Browns, because I really think Baker Mayfield's going to come out and be extra motivated to play really well. Larry Fitzgerald was 7 targets last week, but he only had 3 catches and 20 yards. He's just not working out for him. I thought this offense was going to be absolutely perfect for Larry Fitzgerald, being the big slot receiver, but it just hasn't really worked out that way so far this year. All right, we got a couple of AFC teams visiting NFC teams here. The first one was the Browns game that we just went through, and now we got the Dolphins at the Giants. So the Giants' pass defense. I'm going to start with. I'm going to start with the Giants here. Saquon Barkley should be great in this one. Dolphins give up the 6th most fantasy points to running backs. I'm not sure if we will see Daniel Jones or Eli Manning. I think it's a game-time decision. I haven't seen anything about Daniel Jones being out at quarterback, but we'll see. But either one of them will have a great matchup. The Dolphins give up the 2nd and the 3rd most fantasy points allowed to wide receivers and quarterbacks. They surrender the 3rd most explosive plays. So fire up Darius Slayton, who had 5 catches on 8 targets for 150 yards and 2 touchdowns last week. Shepard and Tate combined for 39 yards on 12 targets versus the bad Eagles secondary. So I'm not really sure what to expect from them. It seems like they're the two guys running all the underneath routes while Slayton's running all the deep stuff. So I think you can really attack the Dolphins' defense wherever you want, but it seems like Slayton and Eli have something brewing there. So the Giants' pass defense is also horrible. They give up the 7th most to quarterbacks, 5th most to wide receivers. They have the 5th highest explosive pass rate. This could be a high-scoring game, but without Devontae Parker, who is still in concussion protocol, they'll have to rely on Isaiah Ford and Allen Hurns at wide receiver, and the rookie the second-year guy Mike Gesicki at tight end. Patrick Laird had 86 total yards on 19 touches. He's one of the few bright spots for Miami this season. Giants are really good against the run since trading for Leonard Williams. So again, I wouldn't get cute and try and play Laird. Stay away from him. It's just good to see at least one running back emerge from this pile of trash that is the Dolphins' running game. All right, moving to the Colts at the Saints. So Jack Doyle was a massive disappointment for me last week. I thought he was going to have another big target day after getting 11 targets and scoring in Week 13. He had a great matchup, but it just didn't work out. Marcus Johnson and Zach Pascal had half of the team's targets last week. Both scored, and I think the Colts are going to have to throw a lot again in this game. Marlon Mack with only 13 carries coming off of that hand injury. Obviously, they're not going to throw him the ball. They're not going to ask him to pass protect. He's probably only going to see 10 to 12, maybe 15 touches total again. I think the Saints are going to put up a lot of points. I think they're going to be pissed off about how that game ended last week. So I think all these Colts are okay plays in FanDuel, but I'm not playing any of them in my playoffs. I can't trust any of you guys. Maybe Zach Pascal. That's pretty much it for me. Alvin Kamara had also a very disappointing game last week. His lowest total yardage game all year. He didn't score in the game that the Saints put up 46 points. Plus, he had his first lost fumble of the year. He's got a tough matchup with the Colts that allow the 5th fewest fantasy points to running back, so I'm concerned about Alvin Kamara. But I'm still playing him in my half PPR league. Dudes with this kind of upside and talent, you just don't sit. Yes, it's been a rough year for him, but I'm riding with him. I'm not getting away from him. I'm not going to be the fool that loses my playoff game because Alvin Kamara had 30 points on my bench. Michael Thomas dominated, of course, in a shootout. The Saints tight end scored 3 times last week, which I don't see happening again. Plus, they play Monday night, so I'm not counting on Jared Cook, who is in concussion protocol, and if you're going into Monday night and he's your only tight end and all of a sudden he's pronounced out, your only backup plan is Josh Hill, I'm not doing it. So I would stay away from them this week. I know they played really well last week, but I'm staying away. All right, the next game, NFC East game here. We got the Eagles and the Redskins with Greg Ward and J.J. Arcega-Whiteside preparing to be the number 1 and number 2 wide receivers for the week. For the Eagles, I expect Ertz and Goddard to be extremely involved. The two combined for 40% of the target share last week. The Redskins allow the 7th most fantasy points to tight ends, so the Eagle tight ends should dominate in this game. I'm playing against Ertz in one of my leagues, and I'm absolutely terrified. 9 catches on 13 targets for 90 yards and 2 touchdowns last week. Just ridiculous. Boston Scott looked awesome last week. 16 touches, over 125 total yards, and a touchdown. He looked really fast. I think Sanders will still see the majority of the running back touches, but they're both decent plays this week. The Redskins also rank in the top 10 for the most fantasy points allowed to running backs. So I think this is going to be a running back tight end game, sprinkled in some deep shots with these other 2 wide receivers. And looking at the Redskins, my boy Darius Geis, this sucks, man. Sprained a MCL, I think it is. Just he can't stay healthy, man. Three knee injuries in his first 2 seasons. He's back on IR, so Peterson is in line for a good 20 touches again. But the Eagles have a great run defense. They allowed the 7th fewest fantasy points to running backs. So I'm not playing Adrian Peterson. Last week we saw Eli and Darius Slayton torch the Eagles secondary like many other wide receivers. And we also saw Terry McLaurin finally score his first touchdown as a pro with Dwayne Haskins throwing him the ball. I think it was his first touchdown since week 4 or 5. It's the first time that McLaurin and Haskins has connected since the second to last game at Ohio State last year. So hopefully they can continue to build on that. You know, you would think that these 2 dudes would just come in and have an automatic chemistry, but it just hasn't worked out like that. So I'm not playing Terry McLaurin, but it is just nice to follow him and keep track of him because he has been the one and only bright spot for this Redskins offense, considering Darius Geis' injury. Hopefully he can come back and be healthy next year because I was excited about drafting him probably in the 3rd, 4th round and getting a number 1 running back out of it because he looks great, man. All right, looking at the Chicago Bears and the Green Bay Packers, NFC North game here. So the Packers are 4th in fantasy points allowed to running backs. David Montgomery had 20 carries last week. The Bears offense has kind of turned it around as of late. So I'm going with Montgomery. I got him in one of my leagues, and I'm going to play him. I think Allen Robinson and Anthony Miller are really the only other plays here. Robinson had 13 targets and 100 yards in last week's win when they played. Who did they play last week? I forget. And Anthony Miller had a touchdown last week and then 140 yards on 13 targets the week before. So I think these 2 guys are okay plays. The Packers have been tough against wide receivers and quarterbacks this year, so this is going to be it's going to be tough, but I think it's going to be a fun game. Packers-Bears is always fun. Looking at the Packers, I know Devontae Adams only had 41 yards and no touchdowns last week, but if you survived, don't get away from him. He had 3 touchdowns the 2 games before last week, and he had 5 straight games with double-digit targets in prior to last week. I'm playing Adams in a non-PPR league this week in the playoffs. I'm not getting away from him. I think Aaron Jones is the only other player that's trustworthy. Jamal Williams is too inconsistent for me. It seems like he only really gets the touches when the game's either really tight or if they're losing. And I think the Packers are going to win this game. All right, we got 2 games left here. Falcons at the 49ers with Calvin Ridley on IR and Julio banged up. I love Austin Hooper. Seeing what the Saints did with Jared Cook and Josh Hill last week, I think the Falcons are going to make Hooper the prime target in the passing game. The 49ers are in the top 5 in fewest fantasy points allowed to all 3 of the skill position players, so I don't know how you can trust anyone but Hooper and Julio. They led the team in targets last week, but honestly, I'd be kind of nervous about Julio anyway with his shoulder issue. Julio's been one of the more frustrating elite players in this league, and with this shoulder injury, you just don't know. Maybe he goes up for one of those high balls and comes down on it wrong and misses the rest of the game. So just got to be careful with these guys. Looking at the passing or at the 49ers, at this point, Kyle Shanahan would have to be an absolute idiot to not give Raheem Mostert more touches. He needs to lead the running back in touches like he did last week. We saw them run a wide receiver pass with Sanders hitting Mostert for a 35-yard touchdown. When I saw that, when I saw that Sanders got traded to San Francisco, I immediately thought of him throwing a touchdown pass to Cortland Sutton as a Bronco last year. Kyle Shanahan is not an idiot, so I expect Mozart to be awesome again. And he's got, Telvin Coleman has what you would consider a revenge game here, but I don't know how they could go back to him. Only 2 yards per carry on his 3 carries last week, and he was not targeted in the passing game. He has kind of fallen off. It's weird that this 49ers team, so over the past 2 years, they've signed big free agent running backs, Tevin Coleman, and the year before, the guy from Minnesota. Damn, how can I not remember this guy's name? God damn it. But anyway, and yet the best running back on their team is the guy that I think he was undrafted, or maybe he was drafted in like the 4th or 5th round. Him and Matt Breida, to me, have been better than both of those guys. So looking at the rest of the team here, you're starting Sanders, Kittle, like I said, Mostert, and Deebo Samuels I think is worth a start as well. I think he's become a must-start, having at least 7 targets and 75 yards or a touchdown in the last 5 games. This is one of the best offenses in the league with one of the best play callers, and I expect him to get his guys the ball. So I'm excited about all the 49ers this week. Last game of the week here, we got the Buccaneers at the Lions. The Bucs are also down. I'm sorry. Got to start with the Lions. The Lions are beat up this week, obviously still without Matthew Stafford, but now they're also down T.J. Hockenson and Marvin Jones. The Bucs secondary is really bad, allowing the 4th most fantasy points to tight ends and the most to wide receivers. So Galladay and Amendola should see big targets. They each had 8 targets last week. The Lions throw the ball to their tight ends 7 times last week and to the running backs 8 times. I wouldn't be surprised if one of those 2 tight ends and Jesse James or Logan Thomas were to score, but I think Amendola is going to see a lot of those inside short-range targets because I doubt they'll ask him to play all that much on the outside. Bo Scarborough is questionable, and I don't think it really matters because the Buccaneers are really good at stopping the run. So I'm only going to trust Galladay and Amendola in this game to get a lot of opportunity in what could be a shootout if Detroit can keep up with Tampa Bay. The Bucs are also down one of their top wide receivers, Mike Evans, and with the Lions pass defense no better than the Buccaneers, Chris Godwin should be a monster. Damn, I suck this game. Brashad Perriman will step into Mike Evans' role as the big body, deep target guy. Only 5 other teams have allowed as many big pass plays as the Lions have this year, so I think Brashad Perriman is a solid replacement for Mike Evans. I expect O.J. Howard and Cam Brate to also be very involved like they were last week. Howard with 73 yards and Brate with a touchdown in the red zone. The Lions allow the 4th most fantasy points to running backs, but I can't trust either of these guys. They again split the carries with 11 each, and they each had 35 yards, so they're pretty much a spinning image of one another. That is Ronald Jones and Peyton Barber. I can't trust either of them. I'm not going to roll with those guys in my playoffs. I'd rather take a flyer on somebody else that I know is going to see more touches than that. So that does it for part 2 of Week 15's Beers and Bruisers Fantasy Football Podcast. Thank you very much for tuning in. Make sure you check us out next week for the last episode of the season as we get everybody ready for Week 16 and hopefully get everybody ready for their championship games. As always, may the fantasy gods be cruel to your opponents.
You have been listening to the Beers and Bruisers Fantasy Football Podcast. For more episodes and information, follow us on social media and tune in every week. Beers and Bruisers is available on Google Podcasts, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Alexa, Reach TV, or your favorite podcast service. Beers and Bruisers is a proud member of the HC Universal Network family of podcasts. To find out more about this and other great shows on our network, Visit us online at hcuniversalnetwork.com or download the free HC Universal Network app today. Fantasy football is fun, but gambling addiction destroys lives. If you or someone you love suffers from gambling addiction, please do not be afraid to seek help. The National Council on Problem Gaming operates a national problem gambling helpline network. Contact them today at 1-800-522-4700. Thank you for tuning in to the Beers and Bruisers Fantasy Football Podcast. Please remember to drink responsibly and always look for your man downfield.